Captain Ayla Voss stood at the edge of the underground chamber, her eyes fixed on the shimmering ancient artifact in front of her. The air was thick with tension, the hum of machinery echoing through the dimly lit room. The relic, a spherical object, embedded with intricate, glowing runes, seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, an energy long forgotten by humankind. It was the key, the only hope for breaking the chains of oppression that had bound humanity for decades. She could hear the faint whispers of her team behind her, their voices barely audible over the drone of their breathing masks, and the nervous anticipation that filled the air. Ayla clenched her fists at her sides. The timing was everything. If the Iron Throne's forces found out about this relic, humanity's last chance would slip through their fingers. A low, gravelly voice broke through her thoughts. "Captain, we've got company." Our second-in-command, Lieutenant Calvin Ricks, had a way of sounding calm, even in the most dire situations. Ayla turned sharply, her pulse quickening. He was watching the holographic screen projected from his wristband, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They're close, very close," he continued. "Sensors indicate multiple ships entering the system. Alliance forces." Ayla's heart sank. The mission, already one of the most dangerous she'd ever undertaken, had just become even more perilous. "How long?" 10 minutes at most," Calvin replied, his tone as measured as ever, though she could see the flicker of worry in his eyes. "Damn it," Ayla muttered under her breath. The Alliance had a way of tracking their every move, but she hadn't expected them to arrive this quickly. It was as though they had been waiting for this moment, their spies already in place. "We need to move now." Ayla snapped, her voice sharp and commanding. "Get the artifact secured. We're heading for the extraction point. Ricks, can you secure a clean exit?" "I'm working on it," Calvin responded, fingers flying over his wristband as he worked to override the facility's security systems. The room was beginning to feel smaller, the walls closing in as the pressure mounted. The rest of the team moved with precision, preparing for their hasty departure. But as Ayla turned to join them, a sound echoed through the chamber, a distant thrum, the unmistakable hum of engines powered by the immense energy of a warship descending into the atmosphere. Her breath caught in her throat. A moment later, the facility's alarms blared, the shrill warning piercing the tension in the room. Red lights flashed, casting long shadows across the walls. "We've been compromised," Ayla said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Move out, now." As her team scrambled into action, Ayla grabbed the artifact. Feeling the surge of energy it emitted the moment, her fingers closed around it. The relic was more than just a tool. It was humanity's last hope, a weapon that could dismantle the Iron Throne's grip on the galaxy. And she had to protect it with her life. The heavy door at the far end of the room slid open with a hiss, and the team raced out into the darkened corridors. The echo of boots on metal floors was drowned out by the roar of explosions as the first wave of enemy forces arrived. The sound was deafening, followed by the rattle of gunfire from their defensive positions. Ayla's heart raced. They were out of time. The extraction point was still 2 kilometers away. "Ricks, give us a clear path." Ayla barked as they sprinted down the corridor. "Working on it," he replied, his voice filled with determination. A blast rattled the floor beneath their feet, sending a shower of debris cascading from the ceiling. Ayla shielded her face with one arm, but didn't break stride. They couldn't afford to stop, not now. The weight of the artifact in her hands was both a burden and a beacon. If they succeeded, it could change everything. If they failed, humanity would remain shackled forever. A sound, Footsteps reached her ears. The unmistakable crunch of armored boots. They were coming. The corridor ahead twisted into darkness, the shadows creeping closer with every step. The sound of pursuit grew louder, metal boots thundering on the metal flooring, a constant reminder that they were not alone. Ayla's team pressed on, their breathing ragged but determined. They were nearing the extraction point, but it felt like the distance between them and safety was growing longer with each passing second. "Rix, is that exit still clear?" Ayla called over her shoulder, her voice tight with urgency. "Negative," Rix replied quickly, his voice crackling through the comms. "The main corridor's been sealed. They'd locked us in. We'll need to go through the old access shafts." "Do it," Ayla ordered. "We'll cover you." Her mind raced, piecing together their dwindling options. They had to move quickly, but every move seemed like a step closer to being trapped. The artifact, a small, unassuming relic in her hand, was humanity's key to breaking the chains of the Iron Throne's oppression. But right now it was also the reason they were in this mess, pursued by forces who would stop at nothing to get it back. The hallway twisted, and Rix dropped down into a ventilation shaft, the team following in quick succession. The air was thick with dust, the faint smell of rust and decay mixing with the cold metal of the shaft's walls. It was cramped, and the air was stale, but it was the fastest route to safety. Ayla was last to enter, her fingers tightly gripping the relic as her boots scraped the narrow metal walls. Sweat stung her eyes, and her heart pounded in her chest. The ship was descending into chaos. Her team had narrowly escaped an ambush, but they weren't out of danger yet. They had made it this far, but they needed a miracle to get the artifact to the Resistance headquarters alive. "How much farther?" Ayla asked, her voice strained. "Not much," Rix replied, "but we've got company." The unmistakable sound of a blaster shot echoed through the shaft, followed by the screech of metal as an enemy soldier dropped down behind them. Ayla cursed under her breath. The Alliance's elite soldiers were everywhere, trained to hunt down anyone who posed a threat to the regime. She spun around just in time to see the flash of a pulse rifle's muzzle. Instinctively, she threw herself against the wall of the shaft, narrowly avoiding the blast that grazed her arm. "Cover fire," she shouted, pulling her own weapon from her holster and turning to face their pursuer. Blaster fire erupted in the confined space, crackling and splintering the metal walls around them. Rix and his team reacted instantly, weapons raised, forcing the soldier back. The enemy was relentless, but Ayla's team had trained for this. They fought not just for survival, but for the future of humanity. The soldier grunted in pain as one of Rix's shots struck him in the chest, sending him tumbling down the shaft. Ayla didn't pause to check his pulse. The mission came first. "Move," Ayla barked. "Get to the extraction point now. I'll cover the rear." The team didn't hesitate, disappearing into the narrow shaft ahead. She knew they couldn't afford to wait much longer. With every passing moment, the risk of losing the artifact grew. The ancient weapon had the power to disable the Iron Throne's superweapon, the Void Fist, a weapon capable of obliterating entire planets. Humanity had no idea how long the Alliance had been searching for the artifact, but they were certain of one thing. If they didn't deliver it to the Resistance, the galaxy would remain under the boot of the Iron Throne forever. Ayla's thoughts were interrupted by another thundering blast that rattled the shaft. She spun around just in time to see a second enemy soldier descending rapidly. This time, they had no choice but to fight. "You're not taking this relic," Ayla snarled under her breath, her eyes narrowing as she aimed her blaster at the soldier. She fired without hesitation, the shot hitting its mark, and the soldier crumpled to the ground with a muffled thud. But the noise had drawn attention. More footsteps. More soldiers. Ayla sprinted forward, her body pushing itself beyond its limits as she raced to join her team. The end of the shaft was in sight. All they needed was a little more time. Ayla's pulse surged as she rounded the corner of the ventilation shaft, the end now so close she could practically taste the fresh air of the outside world. The sounds of pursuit were growing louder, echoing through the cramped, metallic walls behind them. The soldiers were relentless, and they weren't far behind. She didn't know how much longer they had before the Alliance closed in. The end of the shaft came into view, a small service hatch, just big enough for one person to crawl through at a time. Rix was already at the opening, his weapon raised, scanning the area outside. Ayla's mind raced as she reached his side. "Status?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. "They're waiting for us," Rix replied, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the security feeds. "But there's a weak spot. We can make it, if we time it right." Ayla didn't waste time questioning it. Go. Now. One by one, the team squeezed through the narrow opening, emerging into the dim, deserted maintenance bay. It was a temporary relief, an enclosed space, but still inside enemy-controlled territory. She scanned the area, heart pounding, eyes flicking over every corner and exit. If they didn't move fast, they would be cornered. "I'm sending a signal to the extraction shuttle," Rix said, tapping his wristband. "We'll have a clean drop-off point in 2 minutes." "Good. We don't have that long." Ayla's eyes flicked to the rear of the maintenance bay, where shadows were beginning to move. "We need a distraction. Something big." "I can rig a power surge," Rix suggested, already pulling out a small device from his pack. "It'll short-circuit the security systems for a few moments." "Do it." "Everyone, move to the center of the bay and get ready. We're going to make our exit." The team scattered, finding cover behind crates and machinery, their weapons ready. Ayla's mind was running 1,000 scenarios. The relic in her hand was the key to everything, but its power was also a curse. The Iron Throne would stop at nothing to reclaim it, and if they failed to get it to the Resistance, the galaxy would be doomed to years, decades of suffering. Rix's voice broke through her thoughts. Power surge activated. They won't know what hit them for a minute. The lights flickered as the security grid went down. There was no time to waste. Ayla signaled for the team to move. Go. 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 They rushed for the door at the far side of the bay, the sound of their boots loud in the silence, their breaths shallow and quick. But just as they reached the threshold, the door slammed shut with a deafening clang. The entire bay was sealed off. Ayla cursed, slamming her fist against the wall. They had been so close. "Rix, what the hell?" she demanded, whirling on her second in command. "System override failed," he replied quickly, working his wristband again. "But I can try to disable the lock. Hold on." Seconds felt like hours as Rix worked, his fingers flying over the device. The bay had turned into a trap, and Ayla could feel the walls closing in as the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, reached her ears. "They're coming," Lieutenant Cade Ross, the team's sniper, muttered, his gaze scanning the ceiling. "If we don't get this door open in the next 10 seconds, we're done." Ayla's heart skipped a beat. The seconds were slipping away, and they didn't have the firepower to fight their way out. "Rix, now!" she shouted. With a final click, Rix's device emitted a sharp beep, and the lock released with a mechanical groan. The door slid open just as the first blast hit the far side of the bay, sending a shower of sparks and debris into the air. "Move," Ayla commanded. "Move, move, move." The team charged through the door, spilling out into the darkened corridor on the other side. The extraction shuttle was waiting, but they still had to fight their way to it. Ayla's eyes locked on the horizon as she pushed forward, her grip tight on the relic. They were almost there, but the tipping point was near. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about the future of humanity. And as long as she was alive, she would ensure the flame of rebellion burned brightly. Ayla's boots clattered against the cold, steel floor of the corridor as the team sprinted down the hall toward their extraction point. The blaring alarms of the Iron Throne's security system were a constant reminder of the danger closing in. The air was thick with tension, each step bringing them closer to the shuttle that promised escape, or death if they couldn't make it in time. Rix led the charge, his blaster drawn and ready, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Behind him, Ayla's team followed, each one in perfect formation, trusting their training and instincts. They didn't have the luxury of mistakes anymore. 15 meters to the shuttle bay, Rix muttered into the comms, "Stay sharp." But just as they turned the corner, the unmistakable sound of enemy boots echoed from the opposite end of the corridor. Ayla's blood ran cold as the first figures appeared. Iron Throne soldiers, clad in black armor, their weapons raised and ready. The team didn't hesitate. The moment the soldiers came into view, Ayla opened fire, the sharp crack of her blaster reverberating down the hall. The enemy soldiers dove for cover, returning fire with precision. Suppressing fire, Ayla barked, "Keep them down." The team responded in unison, releasing a hail of blaster shots that forced the soldiers into defensive positions. Rix moved with practiced precision, his eyes narrowed as he fired at a soldier's exposed flank. The enemy soldier fell with a grunt, his blaster clattering to the ground. But there were too many. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, and Ayla's team was already pushing their limits. The blaster fire was relentless, and every second they spent in the open felt like an eternity. "We're not going to make it if we keep fighting like this," Lieutenant Cade Ross said, his sniper rifle poised and ready. "We need a plan." Ayla's eyes darted across the hallway, calculating their options. The shuttle bay was close, but they were surrounded. A quick escape was no longer possible. They would have to hold their ground. Rix, disable the security doors to the shuttle bay. "We need an escape route," Ayla commanded. Rix didn't hesitate. On it. As Rix worked to hack into the shuttle's security system, Ayla took charge of covering their backs. The enemy soldiers were regrouping, their fire becoming more concentrated. Ayla could feel the tension rising in her chest. They couldn't afford to be pinned down here for much longer. A burst of blaster fire streaked past her, barely missing her head. She ducked behind a metal pillar, her mind racing. She glanced back at Rix, who was still working frantically on his device. Time was running out. "We don't have much time," Rix said, his voice tense. "The override will take a few more seconds. Hold them off." Ayla gritted her teeth. "Cade, cover the rear. Vela with me." The team split into two groups. Cade climbed into a higher position, taking aim with his sniper rifle, while Vela, the team's demolition expert, moved up beside Ayla. They had one shot at this, and they would take it. Ayla signaled, and Vela threw a stun grenade into the midst of the enemy soldiers. The explosion was deafening, a flash of blinding light and disorienting sound. Several of the soldiers dropped to the ground, stunned, while the others staggered, disoriented by the blast. "Now," Ayla shouted. She and Vela charged forward, pushing past the disoriented soldiers and into the open shuttle bay. Their boots hit the floor of the bay, the hum of the shuttle's engines already alive in the background. Rix was at the controls, his fingers flying over the console, the doors slowly grinding open. "Hurry!" Ayla shouted, her voice a sharp command. "The shuttle is almost ready to launch." Cade's voice crackled through her comms. "We've got company coming from the east. We need to move now, or we're dead." Ayla's heart pounded. "Vela, set the charges on the entrance. We're making a clean break." Vela nodded, sprinting back to the corridor to plant explosives. The shuttle's engines hummed louder, a deep, thrumming sound that promised salvation, but the clock was ticking. Ayla turned to face the door, her blaster raised. She was ready to fight for every inch of ground. They would leave no one behind, not while they still had a chance. The door to the shuttle bay began to close, but the soldiers were closing in fast. With one final glance at the team, Ayla set her resolve. They would make it, or they would die trying. The door to the shuttle bay began to close with a mechanical groan, but Ayla's pulse didn't slow. There was no time for relief, no time to savor the fleeting taste of victory. The Iron Throne soldiers were closing in, and the opening was shrinking by the second. Every move had to be precise, or they wouldn't make it. Vela was working fast, the explosive charges in place and ready to detonate. Ayla turned, her back to the shuttle, as she scanned the corridor for any sign of movement. A fresh wave of soldiers had arrived, their dark armor glinting under the harsh, artificial lights of the base. They were coming in force, too many to count. "Cade, can you give us some cover?" Ayla shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Cade's sniper rifle barked, his steady aim picking off the advancing soldiers with deadly precision. The first few fell, their bodies hitting the cold steel floor with satisfying thuds, but the rest kept coming, relentless and unyielding. "They're not stopping." Cade's voice was laced with frustration. "I need more time. Just a few more seconds." Ayla yelled back. She was still watching the entrance, knowing that the soldiers wouldn't be kept at bay for long. The shuttle's ramp was slowly rising, the final barrier between them and freedom. Every soldier that dropped gave them a few precious moments, but they were rapidly running out. Vela planted the last explosive charge and sprinted back to the shuttle, her face grim. "It's set. We've got 2 minutes before it blows." Ayla nodded. "Rix, get us airborne. Now." Rix, already at the shuttle's controls, didn't hesitate. His fingers flew across the dashboard, activating the engine's thrusters. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and the craft shuddered beneath them as it powered up. Ayla could feel the vibrations through the floor, earth-shattering, yet comforting. The hum of the engines was their lifeline, and they had to make it. The first of the soldiers reached the shuttle's entrance. Ayla opened fire, her shots true as the enemy fell, their bodies tumbling across the floor like ragdolls. There were too many to take down with precision alone, and the weight of the situation settled heavily in her chest. She needed them all to fight with everything they had. If they didn't, they'd be outnumbered and outgunned. "We need to get off this rock," Ayla muttered, her eyes scanning the door for any sign of weakness. "Rix, get us moving." The shuttle's engines hummed louder, lifting off the ground. The heavy metal doors slid closed, and they were momentarily shielded from the chaos outside. But the soldiers were relentless, firing through the doorway as the shuttle began to ascend. Their weapons tore into the walls, sending sparks flying. "Hold on!" Rix yelled as the shuttle lurched into motion. The force of the liftoff pressed Ayla into her seat, the shuttle's engines vibrating as they shot upward. away from the Iron Throne's grasp. Through the viewport, she saw the base grow smaller, the sky beyond darkening with the swirling clouds of a storm. It was over for now, but she knew this wouldn't be their last fight. "Is everyone aboard?" Ayla asked, her voice tight. "All accounted for," Cade responded, a hint of relief in his voice. "But we're not out of the woods yet. The Iron Throne will send reinforcements the moment they realize we've escaped." Ayla nodded. The relic, the key to humanity's freedom, was still safely tucked in her bag, but the hard part was just beginning. She had no illusions about what would come next. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered. "The Iron Throne is going to be after us." Vela, still adjusting her gear, looked up. "We need to go underground. Head to the Resistance stronghold. Fast." "Agreed," Ayla said. "We're not done yet, not by a long shot." The shuttle shuddered as Rix pushed the throttle forward, sending them streaking through the sky. Their path was uncertain, but one thing was clear. If they could just reach the Resistance base, if they could just stay one step ahead, they might have a chance to strike back. But the Iron Throne wouldn't give up easily, and Ayla knew that even with the relic in their possession, the war was far from over. As the shuttle pierced the clouds, she looked out into the vast expanse of space ahead, endless, unknown, and full of promise. There was no turning back now. The future of humanity rested on their shoulders, and they would fight to the bitter end. The shuttle tore through the atmosphere, cutting through the clouds like a blade. Beneath them, the surface of the planet blurred, a chaotic mix of green, brown, and steel grey. But Ayla's mind was elsewhere, focused on the mission ahead. They had made it off the Iron Throne's base, but that was only the beginning. The real battle was just starting. Her gaze flickered to the small panel on the side of the shuttle, the display showing a steady stream of messages and coordinates. Rix was working at the helm, his fingers flying over the controls, eyes locked on the screen. He was the one keeping them alive in the void of space, threading the needle between pursuing ships and getting them to safety. "Anything from the Resistance?" Ayla asked, her voice low but urgent. Rix shook his head. "Nothing yet. We're out of range for their comms, but once we hit the jump point, we'll be in range of their frequency." Ayla nodded, tapping her fingers against her seat in rhythm. They were on a tight timeline. The Iron Throne wasn't known for its mercy, and they would stop at nothing to regain what was stolen from them. Cade, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "We need to be prepared. Even if the Resistance is waiting for us, we don't know what kind of welcome we'll get. They're stretched thin. They might not be able to help us right away." "I know," Ayla replied, "but we don't have many options. We need them, and they need this relic." The relic. Her fingers brushed the bag strapped tightly to her waist. It was all they had, a physical key to humanity's freedom, a symbol of resistance. But Ayla knew better than anyone. A key without a door was useless. The Resistance would need to figure out where to use it, and that would take time. In the meantime, they would need to hide, regroup, and strengthen their forces. Suddenly, the silence of the shuttle was shattered by the harsh crackle of static from the comms system. Ayla's heart skipped a beat as she jumped to attention. "Unidentified craft, this is the Iron Throne's patrol fleet. You are in violation of restricted airspace. Prepare to be boarded or face termination." A cold voice crackled from the speaker. Ayla's mind raced. She glanced at Rix, who immediately began weaving the shuttle into evasive maneuvers, the vessel jerking sharply to the left as the enemy fleet came into view. "They found us," Rix growled. We're going to need more than luck to escape this. Can you outrun them? Ayla asked, her voice steady despite the growing tension. Rix's eyes narrowed as he checked the readouts on his console. Not without a fight. They've got interceptors on our tail. We'll need to take them out before they can get close enough to board us. Ayla stood, her hand automatically reaching for her blaster. The cold metal of the weapon felt familiar in her grip, and for a moment it was the only thing she could trust. We need to split their forces, Ayla said, voice calm but firm. Cade, take the starboard side. Vela, you're with me. We'll hold them off while Rix takes us to that jump point. Cade and Vela nodded, moving into position. Ayla's mind was already calculating their strategy. Their best chance was to disable the enemy interceptors before they could make an attack run. The shuttle rocked violently as the first blast hit. The hull groaned, and Ayla felt a shiver run through her as the vibrations rattled her teeth. She was already sprinting to the back, the sound of her boots echoing against the walls of the cramped shuttle. We've got incoming. Kay shouted over the comms, the sharp crackle of his rifle evident even through the static. I've taken down 2, but there's more. Keep it up, Ayla shouted back. We can't let them get close. Her hand reached the shuttle's rear compartment, where the weapons systems were housed. The turrets spun to life at her command, their auto-targeting systems locking onto the closest interceptors. She squeezed the trigger. A brilliant flash of light erupted as the first interceptor exploded into a ball of flame, its metal frame torn apart by the force of the blast. But the victory was short-lived. Another ship broke through the barrage, closer now, its weapons primed for a strike. Hold steady, Ayla muttered to herself. She fired again, this time more precisely, the blast cutting through the tail of the approaching craft. It spiraled out of control, tumbling toward the planet's surface below. But there was no time to celebrate. More ships were closing in, and the jump point was still several minutes away. We need that jump point now, Ayla barked. Rix's voice came through the comms, strained but resolute. Engaging the jump drive. We're almost there. Just a little longer. Ayla gritted her teeth. The shuttle was taking a beating, but they were making it. They were going to survive this. The jump drive whined as it powered up, the ship shuddering with the effort. Now, Rix shouted. With one final, desperate burst of energy, the shuttle broke free from the gravitational pull of the planet, the stars around them blurring into streaks of light as they entered the jump zone. The enemy interceptors were left behind in the chaos, unable to keep up. Ayla leaned back in her seat, her pulse racing. They had made it, for now. But this was just the beginning. The true fight had yet to come. The shuttle lurched violently as it broke free from the gravity well of the planet, and for a split second, everything was silent. Then the jump drive activated with a deep, resonating hum, the universe warping around them as the stars became streaks of light. The tension inside the ship was palpable, each crew member holding their breath, unsure of what awaited them on the other side. Ayla exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the armrest. The hum of the jump drive was a familiar sound, but it was one that never lost its intensity. A sudden flicker of movement caught her eye. Cade, his rifle still clutched in one hand, his gaze darting between the comms and the viewport. "We made it out," he said, his voice quiet but edged with disbelief. Rix didn't reply immediately. He was focused on navigating the shuttle through the distortions of space. The ship vibrated slightly as they continued their jump into the unknown, their path uncertain. Vela, sitting near the rear of the shuttle, pulled herself to her feet. How long until we reach the resistance? Shouldn't be too long, Rix answered, but the uncertainty in his voice spoke volumes. He was navigating the jump to the Resistance's hidden base, an isolated place few knew about, tucked away in the farthest reaches of space, far beyond the Iron Throne's radar. Once we do, Ayla said, her eyes locking onto Rix's, we need to move fast. The Iron Throne will send a pursuit fleet after us the moment they realize we're not dead. Rix glanced up at her, his face pale with the strain of their near escape. I know, but if we don't get the coordinates right, we'll end up deep in uncharted space, and that's a risk I'm not willing to take. If the Resistance doesn't find us, we'll be on our own. Vela raised an eyebrow. And when the Iron Throne catches up with us, what then? Ayla shook her head, her jaw tight. We fight, but we can't afford to get caught. The relic is more than just a weapon. It's humanity's only chance at breaking free from the Iron Throne. We can't let them take it back. Silence hung in the air, the weight of her words settling over the crew. The stakes had never been higher. After what felt like an eternity, Rix finally spoke again, entering the Resistance's sector, adjusting for deceleration now. A soft thrum reverberated through the shuttle as Rix's hands flew over the controls. The stars outside the viewport began to slow, the streaks of light returning to their normal pinprick points of brilliance. But the tension didn't ease. If anything, it deepened. A sudden jolt made Ayla's stomach lurch as the jump drive powered down, and they were thrust back into normal space. The familiar stars of their galaxy came back into view, but so did the shadow of the unknown. We're here, Rix said, his voice tense. But something's wrong. Ayla's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Rix's gaze flicked from the controls to the viewport. His brow furrowed. There should be a beacon, a signal to guide us in, but I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing any resistance ships either. Maybe they're lying low, Cade suggested, though his voice lacked confidence. No, Ayla said, her gut telling her something was off. They would have anticipated this. They'd have a plan for when we showed up. There's no way they wouldn't be ready. She turned to Rix. Can you trace their signal? Find something. Rix's fingers danced across the console, his face creased with concentration. I'm trying, but the Resistance might be masking their signal. Or, his voice trailed off, and he glanced up at Ayla, his eyes filled with doubt. Or they might be gone, entirely. The words hit like a slap, and for a moment, no one moved. The silence inside the shuttle was thick with the realization of what it meant. If the Resistance was gone, if they had been discovered, then all their hopes rested on this small crew, on the relic, on a war they hadn't yet started. Ayla's mind raced, her instincts screaming at her to act, but her hands were frozen. This wasn't part of the plan. They had no backup, no reinforcements. They were alone. Rix, Ayla said, her voice steady despite the chaos churning in her chest. Scan for nearby ships. If the Iron Throne is hunting us, they'll be close by. We need to be ready to fight. Rix didn't respond immediately. He was still staring at the controls, tapping away as he tried to piece together a solution. But the longer they waited, the more pressing the reality became. The Iron Throne was out there, and they had no idea where or when they would strike. Nothing on the scanner yet, Rix said, finally breaking the silence. But if the Resistance is compromised, we're on our own. No backup. Then we make our own plan, Ayla replied, her eyes hardening with determination. We fight. We find a way to strike first. Just as she spoke, the alarms blared to life, loud, insistent, and unmistakable. "Incoming ships," Cade shouted, his rifle at the ready. The unmistakable silhouettes of Iron Throne ships emerged from the darkness of space, their ominous bulk dwarfing their shuttle. The hunt was on. Ayla clenched her fists. There was no turning back now. "We're not running anymore," she said, her voice fierce. "We fight." The alarms blared again, cutting through the tense silence of the shuttle. Outside the viewport, the shadow of the Iron Throne's fleet loomed large, its ships closing in with terrifying precision. Ayla's pulse hammered in her ears as she took a steadying breath. There was no time for hesitation, no time for second-guessing. "We've got incoming," Cade growled, his grip tightening on his rifle. "They're not waiting for an invitation." "Get ready," Ayla ordered, her voice calm but firm. "Rix, prep the weapons systems. Vela, get to the rear turret. Cade, help me with the forward cannons." Rix's fingers flew over the console, activating the ship's defense systems with a practiced ease. The shuttle shuddered as the weapons hummed to life, the targeting system locking onto the incoming fleet. The small craft they were in wasn't designed for this kind of fight, but it had enough firepower to make the Iron Throne's ships think twice. Ayla's eyes flicked to the viewport, watching as the massive shadow of the enemy ships drew closer. They were outnumbered, and the odds were slim, but Ayla refused to back down. This was humanity's last stand. The relic in her possession, the key to their freedom, couldn't fall into the hands of the Iron Throne. The first blast from the enemy fleet hit the shuttle's shields, sending a violent jolt through the entire vessel. Ayla's knuckles whitened as she gripped the controls. The shuttle's shields flared with bright blue light, absorbing the brunt of the attack, but she knew they couldn't take much more. "We're not going to last long like this," Rix shouted over the din of blading alarms. "I need a way to get us out of here." "Not yet," Ayla responded, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to deal with their ships. Take out their lead vessel, and the rest will scatter." She glanced over at Cade, who had already aimed the forward cannons at the nearest enemy ship. "Fire on my mark." She took a deep breath, focusing, waiting for the perfect moment. The enemy ships were closing in, their weapons charging for another strike. Ayla's heart pounded, every instinct telling her to pull the trigger, to act before it was too late. "Mark," she said, her voice a sharp command. Cade squeezed the trigger, sending a volley of plasma fire streaking through the void. The first round hit the enemy vessel with a resounding explosion, shaking the shuttle with the force of it. The enemy ship faltered for a moment, its shields flaring, but it wasn't enough to stop the attack. "Nice shot," Vela called out, her voice tinged with admiration from the rear turret. "I'm locking onto another one." The shuttle rocked again as another blast hit the shields, but Ayla didn't flinch. They were making progress, but it wasn't enough. The enemy fleet wasn't retreating. They were closing in tighter, preparing for a full assault. "Rix, can you calculate a jump?" Ayla asked, urgency creeping into her voice. "We can't keep this up for long." "I'm trying." Rix snapped back, his face pale with strain. "But the interference from their ships is messing with the jump drive. It's going to take a minute to get a lock." Ayla's mind raced, calculating the options. They were cornered, and their window for escape was shrinking with each passing second. She could feel the weight of responsibility bearing down on her. If they didn't make it out, if they didn't stop the Iron Throne now, humanity's last hope would be lost. "Vela, Cade, keep firing," she ordered, her voice unwavering. "I'll give Rix the cover he needs." Without waiting for a response, Ayla sprinted to the rear of the shuttle, where Vela and Cade were positioned. The rear turret fired off another round, its bright beam lighting up the dark void. Ayla aimed her blaster, taking out a few of the smaller fighter ships as they passed by, offering Rix a brief moment of breathing room. "Come on, come on," Rix muttered to himself, his fingers flying across the controls as the seconds ticked by. The shuttle shook again as another blast tore through the shields, sending sparks flying from the console. Rix cursed, his frustration clear. "We've got one shot at this, Ayla. If we don't jump now, we're done for." Ayla's heart skipped a beat. She knew the risk. A single miscalculation, and they could end up trapped in the middle of enemy space, surrounded by the Iron Throne's forces. But she had no choice. "Do it," she commanded. Rix slammed his fist down on the final key, and the ship lurched forward as the jump drive powered up. The stars outside the viewport began to distort again, twisting into bright lines of light as the shuttle shot forward, breaking free from the clutches of the enemy. The shuttle jumped through the folds of space, the universe warping around them. Time seemed to stretch and bend in those moments, but as they broke free from the jump, the stars outside stabilized. "We made it," Rix breathed, his voice a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Ayla let out a long breath, her muscles sore from the tension. They were alive. They had escaped. But the battle wasn't over. The Iron Throne was still out there, still hunting them. They had to move fast, regroup, and find a way to strike back. The relic was their only chance, and Ayla wasn't about to let it slip through their fingers. "Set course for the nearest resistance base," she said, her voice resolute. "We've still got a war to win." And with that, the shuttle sped off into the unknown, its crew ready for whatever came next. Humanity's fight was just beginning.